Hello students. This class we are going to learn about the additional English for third semester BA BCom, BBA, BCA, BSc FAD from the Bangalore Central University. Let us learn the lesson slowly. Hello students. This class we are going to learn about the first lesson Wilshire Bass by Hishiye Yamamoto. Predating activities. Do you think multiracial discrimination exists in today's global scenario? Have a discussion with the students. Watch the movie Namaste in the class. Ask students to debate on the theme of alienation in the movie. What initiatives should be taken to prevent racial discrimination? What should be the responsibility of younger generation? Ask students to create presentation on the issue. Wilshire Boulevard begins somewhere near the heart of the downtown Los Angeles, and except for the few digressions scarcely worth mentioning, goes straight out of the edge of the Pacific Ocean. It is wide boulevard and traffic on it is very fast. For the most part, it is bordered on either side with examples of the recent Stark architecture, which favors a great deal of glass. As the boulevard approaches the sea, however, the landscape becomes a bit more pastoral, so that the university and the soldiers' home there give the appearance of being few country estates. Esther Kurovia got to know the stretch of territory quite well while her husband Bureau was in one of the hospitals at the soldiers' home. They had been married less than a year when his back injury in the war began troubling him again, and he was forced to take 3 months of the treatment as Savitail before he was able to go back to work. During this time, Esther was permitted to visit him twice a week, and she usually took the yellow bus out on Wednesdays because she didn't know the first thing about driving and because her friends were not able to take her except on Sundays. She always enjoyed the long bus ride very much because her street companions usually turned out to be amiable, and if they did not, she took voracious pleasure in gazing out at the moment almost unmitigated elegance along the fabulous street. It was one of these Wednesday trips that Esther committed a grave sin of omission which caused her later to burst into tears and which caused her acute discomfort for a long time afterwards whenever something reminded her of it. The man came on the bus quite early, and Esther noticed him briefly as he entered because he said gaily to the driver, "Hey Robert, all those guys do is take money from me every day just for giving me a short lift." Handsome in a red-faced way, graying, medium of height, and dressed in a dark grey sport suit with a yellow and black flowered shirt. He said this is a nice, resonant, carrying voice which got the responsible scattering of territories from this bus. Esther, somewhat amused and classifying him as a Samatomanic, promptly forgetting about him, and since he was sitting alone in the first regular seat, facing the back of the driver and the two front benches facing each other, she returned to looking out the window, and at the next shop a considerable mass of people piped on. The last two climbing up were an elderly Oriental man and his wife. Both were neatly clothed, and the woman who wore her hair in a bun and carried a bunch of yellow and dark red flowers came to sit with Esther. Esther turned her head to smile greeting. Here were all Orientals together on the bus, but the woman was watching with some concern. Excuse me. Her husband, who was asking direction of the driver. His faint English was infected in such a way as to make Esther decide he was probably Chinese, and she noticed that he had to repeat his question several times before the driver could answer it. Then he came it to see in the seat across the aisle from his wife. It was about then that the man's voice, which Esther recognized soon as belonging to the Sumatonic, began a loud monologue in the seat just behind her. It was not really a monologue, since he seems to be addressing his seat companion, but this person was not heard to give a single answer. The man's subject was a figure in the local sporting world who had a nice fortune invested in the several of shining buildings the bus was just passing. He's as tight-fisted as they make them, as tight-fisted as they come. The man said, "Why, he wouldn't give you the sweet of hers." He paused her to rephrase his metaphor. Won't it give you the swat of her sperm? And he continued in this vein, discussed the private life of the famous man so frankly that Esther knew he must be quite drunk. But he listened with interest, wondering how much of the diatribe was true, because the public legend about the famous man was empathetic about his charity. Suddenly, the woman with the jerked around to get a look at the speaker, and Esther felt her giving him a quick but thorough examination before she turned back around. "So, you don't like it?" the man inquired, and it was a moment before Esther realized that he was now directing his attention to her seat neighbor. "Well, if you don't like it," he continued, "why don't you get off this bus? Why don't you go back where you came from? Why don't you go back to China?" Trying now to make up for moral shabbinesses, she turned towards the little woman and smiled at her across chrysanthemums, shaking her head a little to get across her message. "Don't pay any attention to that stupid old drunk. He does not know what he is saying. Let's take things this our stride." But the woman in the turn, looking at her, presented a face so impassive yet cold, and eyes so expressionless yet hostile, that Esther's overtune fell quite flat. "Okay, okay, if that is the way you feel about it," she thought to herself. Then the bus made another stop, and she heard the man proclaim ringingly, "So clear out, all of you, and remember to take every last one of your slant-eyed Pickaninnies with you." This is the final advice as he stepped down from the middle door. The bus remained at the stop long enough for Esther to watch the man across the street with a slightly exploring step. When as it started up again, the bespectacled man in front of stuttered up to go and made a clumsy speech to the Chinese couple and possibly to Esther. The rest of the ride was uneventful, and Esther stared out of the window with eyes didn't see. Getting off a last of the soldiers' home, she was aware of Chinese couple getting off after her, but she avoided looking at them. Then, while she was walking towards Burroughs Hospital, where quickly there arose in her mind some words she had once read and let stick in her craw. "People say, do not regret what he says. Now he is in liquor. Perhaps it is the only time he ought to be regarded." These words repeated themselves until her saying detachment was gone every bit, and she was filled once again in her life with a infuriating, helpless, insidiously sensation of there being in the world nothing solid. She could put her finger on nothing solid. She could come to grips with nothing solid. She could sink her teeth into nothing solid. When she reached Burroughs' room and got a sight of his welcoming face, she ran to his bed and broke into the sobs that she couldn't control. Burrow was amused because it was hardly her first visit and she had never shown such weakness before, but solving the misery handily. He patted her head, looked around smugly at his roommates, and asked tenderly, "What is the matter? You have been missing me a whole lot." Hook. And she finally, trying her eyes, sniffled and nodded, bravely smiled and answered him with a question, "Yes, weren't women silly?" That is the brief summary of the lesson, followed by the glossary. Bower, a wide street or a town city, usually with the trees on each side. Pastel, representing the pleasant traditional features. Viserious, images and sympathetic participation. So, Purple Heart is a United States military decoration award in the name of the president of those wounded and killed while serving. So, make use of this class glossary, learn the lesson.